You know that feeling when your world just ends? Not slowly, not with warning, but like someone flipped a switch. That's what happened to me on a Tuesday morning in March, standing in front of 6 investors who were about to hand over $12 million, until the CEO's son walked in. The faces in the boardroom turned toward me with that mixture of pity and awkward silence that tells you your career just ended. I stood there frozen, my presentation still glowing on the big screen behind me. 3 years of work on the SmartLine production system that could save our company serious money. "Sorry to interrupt you, Russell," Scott said, strutting in wearing a suit that probably cost more than most of our guys make in a month. The CEO's son had perfect timing, as always. "But there's been a change of plans. My name's Russell Patterson. I'm 47, been an engineer for 25 years, worked my way up from the shop floor to senior engineering director. Started at 22, right out of technical college, been grinding ever since. Never thought I'd be standing in a boardroom watching my life's work get flushed down the drain by some kid with an MBA and zero real-world experience." You gotta understand, this wasn't just any presentation. This was the big one, the make-or-break moment for our whole operation. Patterson Manufacturing had been my home for 15 years, and I'd spent the last 3 developing something that could actually matter. The SmartLine system. Automated production processes that could cut our manufacturing costs by 20% while boosting output by 15%. Doesn't sound revolutionary to you, maybe, but in our business, those numbers mean the difference between staying competitive and watching jobs move overseas. I watched Scott glide to the front of the room while my hands went numb around my presentation clicker. The 6 investors who'd been nodding along to my pitch suddenly straightened up like someone had yanked their leashes. These guys controlled our future. Patrick Hayes and his group had been circling us for months, looking for American manufacturers with real innovation. "My father asked me to share some exciting news," Scott continued, not even glancing my way. "We've developed an alternative approach with much better market potential." My throat went dry as he pulled up his own slides, minimizing my presentation with a casual click. Just like that, 3 years of 16-hour days disappeared from view. The room's attention shifted completely as my work vanished. You know what really got me? The slides looked familiar. Real familiar. "We're going with my approach instead," he said quietly as he passed by me, then louder to the room. "Russell's work was good foundation, but we're taking a more innovative direction." Foundation. Like I was some junior engineer laying groundwork instead of the guy who designed the whole damn thing. I stood there invisible while he showed slides that looked suspiciously like concepts from my private notebooks, ideas I'd scribbled down during late nights in my home workshop, working through problems on my own time, my own dime. Things I'd never formally presented, but had documented while developing solutions. Somehow, those ideas now belong to him. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. Growing up, I watched my dad work double shifts at the GM plant, coming home with grease under his fingernails and pride in his voice when he talked about building something real. He taught me that in manufacturing, you earn respect through results, not connections. When other kids were playing video games, I was in our garage taking apart engines and putting them back together. That hands-on education served me better than any textbook ever could. Dennis hired me 15 years ago straight from my previous job at a smaller outfit. "Fresh perspectives solve old problems," he'd said during my interview, impressed by my hands-on approach to automation systems. For 14 years, I busted my ass, worked nights and weekends, always looking for ways to make our processes better, more efficient. The SmartLine system wasn't some flash of genius. It was years of incremental improvements, studying every bottleneck, every inefficiency. I never saw Scott coming. He showed up 8 months ago, fresh from Wharton Business School, installed in a corner office with the made-up title VP of Innovation. Dennis introduced him with proud father eyes, telling us how lucky we were to have his fresh perspective. You know how it is. Boss's kid walks in, everyone kisses ass and pretends it's normal. I tried to be welcoming when he started asking questions about my projects. Hell, I was even flattered. Here's this young guy with an expensive education wanting to learn from an old-school engineer like me. When he asked to see my methodology, explained how he wanted to understand the commercial applications better, I opened my files completely. Thought collaboration was the goal. "You're brilliant, Russell," he told me once, leaning against my workstation while I walked him through some calculations. "But you don't understand how this industry actually works." I should have paid more attention to that comment. Should have realized those words were both a warning and a threat. The investor meeting had been scheduled for months, my chance to present directly to the people who controlled our future. Dennis had personally asked me to prepare, reviewed my slides, nodded with satisfaction at the results. I'd been working toward this moment for years, honestly. This was going to be my legacy, proof that American manufacturing could still innovate, still compete. Then a week before the meeting, Scott started asking more detailed questions about my latest prototypes. He insisted on seeing my project notebooks, wanted copies of my documentation, said he needed to understand the full scope for strategic planning. Like an idiot, I handed everything over. Now, watching him present my work as his own innovation, I finally understood what he meant about how the industry actually works. When Scott finished his presentation, the room erupted in applause. Patrick Hayes, our lead investor, actually stood up. "This is exactly what we hope to see," he beamed at Scott. "Much more commercially viable than traditional approaches." I packed up my laptop with mechanical movements as they discussed funding rounds and implementation timelines. Nobody noticed when I slipped my company ID out of my wallet and placed it on the conference table. I caught Dennis's eye as I headed for the door. The CEO who once told me I was the backbone of this company now looked right through me like I was already gone. "Enjoy the funding," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. It wasn't until I reached my pickup in the parking lot that the shaking started. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to process what just happened. 25 years of loyalty, my innovation, my future, and they didn't even need me to explain how it worked. Scott had studied my notebooks closely enough to steal my concepts and present them as his own brilliant ideas. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, watching other employees heading to lunch, going about their normal Tuesday like my world hadn't just imploded. That's when it hit me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something else entirely. Calm. Focused. Like when you're troubleshooting a complex machine failure and suddenly see exactly what's wrong and how to fix it. See, here's what Scott didn't understand about engineering. It's not just about having the blueprints or knowing what the end result should look like. It's about understanding every single component, every process, every potential failure point. You can memorize my presentation all you want, but if you don't know why each step works the way it does, you're just reciting poetry in a language you don't speak. I drove home through neighborhoods I'd driven through for 15 years, past the houses of guys I worked with, past the school my kids went to before they left for college. My mortgage payment was $2,400 a month. Sarah's tuition at state was $15,000 a year. Mike's at the community college was $3,500. My wife Jennifer had been talking about finally taking that trip to visit her sister in Colorado. All of that depended on the job I'd just walked away from. But you know what? Sometimes a man's got to decide what he's worth. When I pulled into my driveway, Jennifer was in the garden planting something for spring. She looked up when she heard the truck, probably wondering why I was home at 2 in the afternoon. "How'd the presentation go?" she called out, brushing dirt off her hands. "Interesting," I said. "I quit." She just stood there for a second, holding a small shovel, processing what I'd said. Jennifer's practical like that, doesn't panic, thinks things through. After 22 years of marriage, she knew me well enough to know I wouldn't do something like this without a reason. "Okay," she said finally. "Want to tell me about it? Over coffee?" That's my Jennifer. 22 years, and she still surprises me. Over the next hour, I laid out everything that happened. She listened without interrupting, asked a few questions about the technical details, nodded when I explained about Scott stealing my work. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So what's your plan?" she asked. "Still working on that part." My phone had been buzzing during our conversation. I finally checked it. 3 texts from Kevin Torres, my best engineer and closest friend at the company. "What happened? Everyone's talking, but nobody knows anything. Dennis called an all-hands meeting. Says there were some personnel changes. Call me when you get this. Something's not right." I stared at those messages, thinking about Kevin and the other guys I'd worked with for years. Good people, skilled workers, guys with families and mortgages just like mine. They deserved to know what really happened. But more than that, they deserved better leadership than what they were getting. Before I could call Kevin back, another message came in. This one from Dennis himself. "We need to talk. This doesn't have to end badly for either of us." I showed Jennifer the message. She read it and shook her head. 25 years and now he wants to negotiate? He's probably realizing they can't actually implement the system without me. Can they? I thought about that for a minute. Scott's got my presentations, my documentation, even some of my prototype specs. But the real knowledge, the troubleshooting experience, the understanding of how all the pieces work together, that's up here. I tapped my temple. And it stays here. Jennifer smiled for the first time since I'd been home. So what are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe it's time I started my own company. The idea had been bouncing around in my head for months, honestly. Not because I was unhappy at Patterson Manufacturing, but because I kept seeing opportunities, improvements that could be made if someone was willing to take some risks. Dennis was conservative, cautious, which made sense for a guy running a company his father built. But sometimes conservative means you get passed by. You've been planning this, Jennifer said. It wasn't a question, not planning exactly, but preparing, yeah. I've been documenting everything I developed on my own time, keeping detailed records of when and how I came up with different innovations. Call it insurance. How much insurance? I went to my home office and pulled out a thick folder from my filing cabinet. Legal documents, timestamps, even photos of my workshop notebooks with dates clearly visible. 3 weeks ago, I'd filed preliminary paperwork to establish Patterson Engineering Solutions as an LLC. Not because I knew this would happen, but because I'd learned to protect myself. Enough, I said. Jennifer looked through the documentation, her background as a paralegal helping her understand what she was seeing. This is thorough, Russell. Really thorough. Had to be. I've seen too many good engineers get screwed over by people who don't understand what we do but know how to work the system. My phone rang. Dennis again. I let it go to voicemail, but Jennifer raised an eyebrow. You're going to have to deal with him eventually, I know. But on my terms, not his. That evening, I called Kevin back. We met at Murphy's, the bar where a lot of the engineering crew went after work. Kevin was already there when I arrived, looking worried. Tell me what really happened, he said after I'd ordered a beer. I gave him the short version. Scott stealing my work, the humiliation in the boardroom, my decision to walk away. Kevin listened, occasionally shaking his head or muttering under his breath. That little shit, he said when I finished. I knew something was off when he started hanging around your workstation so much. Yeah, well, live and learn. So what now? You looking for another job? I took a sip of my beer, choosing my words carefully. Kevin was a friend, but he was still employed by Patterson Manufacturing. Actually, I'm thinking about starting my own operation. Kevin's eyes lit up. You mean like consulting work? Something like that. I wasn't ready to tell him everything yet, but Kevin was sharp. He'd figure it out soon enough. Well, if you need someone who actually understands your systems... He left the sentence hanging. I'll keep that in mind. We talked for another hour about everything except the elephant in the room. What was going to happen at Patterson Manufacturing without me? But I could see Kevin was thinking about it too. He knew that company better than almost anyone, and he knew exactly what kind of mess they were walking into. The next morning, I woke up at my usual 5:30 a.m., made coffee, and did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I didn't go to work. Instead, I sat in my home workshop, surrounded by prototypes and notebooks, and started making phone calls. First call was to Mike Rodriguez, my patent attorney. We'd worked together before on some smaller innovations, and I trusted him to shoot straight with me. Russell, he said when I explained the situation, you've got good documentation here, but this could get messy. Corporate intellectual property disputes usually are. How messy? Depends on how hard they want to fight and how much they're willing to spend on lawyers. Good news is, your documentation looks solid. You've been careful about developing this stuff on your own time with your own resources. What about the work I did at the company, the preliminary versions? That's where it gets tricky. But if you can prove the core innovations came from your independent research, you've got a case. Question is, do you want to go to war? I thought about that. Did I want to spend the next 2 years in court battles? Not particularly. But I also wasn't going to roll over and let them steal my life's work. Let me ask you this, Mike. If I were to start my own company, using only the innovations I can prove I developed independently, what would that look like legally? Much cleaner. You'd be competing with them, sure, but that's business. As long as you're not using their proprietary information or trade secrets, you're fine. Good to know. My second call was to Ray Williams, a guy I'd known for years who ran a small manufacturing outfit about 2 hours north. Ray had been talking for months about wanting to upgrade his production systems but not having the capital for a complete overhaul. "Russell! How the hell are you? I heard you were doing some big presentation yesterday." "Yeah, about that. How would you feel about being my first customer instead of Patterson's?" There was a pause. "Come again?" "Long story, but I'm not with Patterson anymore. I'm thinking about starting my own engineering consultancy, and I remember you saying you needed some automation improvements." "Well, shit. Yeah, I mean, if you're available. When can we talk? How about this afternoon?" Ray's operation was perfect for what I had in mind. Small enough that we could implement changes quickly, but big enough to serve as a real-world test case. If I could show measurable improvements there, it would be proof of concept that no investor could argue with. While I was on the road to Ray's plant, my phone started blowing up. Kevin, Dennis, even a couple of guys from the shop floor. Word was spreading that something was seriously wrong at Patterson Manufacturing. Kevin's text was the most informative. "They tried to run your demo for the investors this morning. Complete disaster. System crashed twice, efficiency numbers were all wrong. Dennis is losing his mind." I pulled over and called him back. "Russell, thank God. It's chaos here. The whole SmartLine implementation is falling apart. What happened exactly?" Scott tried to walk the investors through the system, but he doesn't understand the calibration protocols. When they asked technical questions, he just kept saying the system was self-optimizing and would work itself out. Then, when they wanted to see actual efficiency numbers, the readings were showing a 5% decrease in output instead of the 15% increase you demonstrated. I couldn't help but smile. Self-optimizing, huh? Gets better. When one of the investors asked about troubleshooting procedures, Scott said they'd hired external consultants to handle technical issues. That's when Patrick Hayes asked who exactly these consultants were, since they'd been told this was all developed in-house. And Scott couldn't answer. Just kept saying they had top industry experts lined up. The whole thing fell apart from there. This was playing out exactly like I'd expected. You can steal someone's presentation, but you can't steal their understanding. Engineering isn't about looking good in a boardroom. It's about making things work when the pressure's on. What's Dennis doing? That's the crazy part. He's been trying to call you all morning, but he's also been on the phone with lawyers. Word is he's talking about going after you for sabotage. Sabotage? I almost laughed. I didn't touch their systems. I know that, and you know that, but Dennis is desperate. The investors walked out around 11 a.m., and the board called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. This was moving faster than I'd expected. Good for me, bad for them. Kevin, let me ask you something. Hypothetically, if someone were to offer you a position at a new company, one where your experience and expertise were actually valued, would you be interested? There was a long pause. Russell, are you offering me a job? Not yet, but I might be soon. Then hypothetically, yes, absolutely. After we hung up, I called Jennifer to update her on the situation. Sounds like you've got them right where you want them, she said. Yeah, but now comes the hard part. I need to prove I can actually deliver what I'm promising. You can. The question is whether you're going to get the chance before Dennis tries to bury you in legal paperwork. She was right. I needed to move fast, establish my own credibility before Patterson Manufacturing could mount any kind of effective counterattack. The meeting with Ray Williams was just the beginning. When I got to Ray's plant, he was waiting for me in the parking lot, looking excited and nervous at the same time. "So," he said as we walked toward his facility, "you really think you can help us compete with the big guys?" "Ray," I said, looking around at his operation. "Smaller than Patterson's, but clean and well organized. I think I can do better than that. I think I can help you beat them." Ray's plant was smaller than Patterson's, but I could see the potential immediately. Good equipment, skilled workers, just needed better coordination between the different production lines. We spent 3 hours walking through his operation, and I took notes on everything: bottlenecks, inefficiencies, opportunities for improvement. "Here's what I'm thinking," I told Ray as we wrapped up. "I can implement a scaled-down version of my automation system here, something that'll give you real improvements without breaking the bank. We're talking maybe 15% efficiency gains and 12% cost reduction within 60 days. What's it going to cost me? Normally, a consulting project like this would run you $200,000 plus implementation costs. But I'll tell you what, you let me use your plant as a showcase for potential investors, and I'll do it for $75,000. If I don't hit those numbers, You don't pay. Ray didn't hesitate. Deal. We shook hands right there in his office. My first contract as Patterson Engineering Solutions. On the drive home, Kevin called with more news from the disaster zone. Russell, you're not going to believe this. Dennis just called another all-hands meeting. He's telling everyone that the SmartLine project is on hold due to technical complications and that they're exploring legal action against former employees who may have compromised proprietary systems. He's really going down that road? Gets worse. 3 more engineers just put in their notice. Word is spreading that this whole thing was built on stolen work, and nobody wants to be associated with it. What about Scott? Haven't seen him since yesterday. Rumor is he's been reassigned to special projects, which we all know means his dad stuck him in an office somewhere to keep him out of sight. That evening, Jennifer and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset and talking through what came next. So you've got your first client, she said. What about funding for the bigger picture? Funny you should ask. I pulled out my phone and showed her a text message that had come in an hour earlier from Patrick Hayes. Would like to discuss investment opportunities with your new venture. Are you available to meet this week? Jennifer smiled. That was quick. Investors don't like being lied to, and they really don't like losing money because someone lied to them. 2 days later, I found myself back in a conference room with Patrick Hayes and his investment group. But this time, I was the one in control. Gentlemen, I said, setting up my laptop. What I'm about to show you is the real SmartLine production system. Not the presentation you saw earlier this week, but the actual working technology. I walked them through everything. The technical specifications, the implementation timeline, the pilot program I'd already started with Ray Williams, the documentation proving I'd developed this independently. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. This is embarrassing, Patrick said finally. We just spent 2 days being sold a bill of goods. It happens, I replied. The important thing is what you do next. Andrea Walsh, another investor, leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Russell? Patterson Engineering Solutions is seeking $8 million in initial funding to scale this technology. We're not trying to build a massive corporation. We're focused on being the best at what we do. Small, efficient, innovative. And your team? I smiled. 4 experienced engineers so far, all people who left Patterson Manufacturing in the past week due to leadership concerns, plus partnerships with smaller manufacturers who want to compete with the big players but can't afford the big consulting fees. The questions came fast after that. Technical details, market projections, implementation timelines. But these were questions I could answer because I understood every aspect of what I was selling. 3 hours later, I walked out with a commitment for $6 million in funding, with performance milestones that could bring it to $10 million. The news hit the industry blogs that same afternoon. Major investors pull funding from Patterson Manufacturing, back former engineers' new venture. Patterson stock dropped 25% in after-hours trading. Dennis called me that evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Russell, we need to talk. I'm listening. This has gotten out of hand. The board is talking about removing me. The investors are gone. Half my engineering team has quit. That's unfortunate. Come back. We can work something out. Equity partnership, whatever you want. I looked around my workshop, at the equipment I'd bought with my own money, at the business I was building on my own terms. Dennis, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in working for you anymore. Then what do you want? I want you to leave me alone to build something better than what you had. There was a long pause. This isn't how I wanted things to end between us. Then you should have thought about that before you let your son steal my work and present it as his own. I hung up and turned off my phone. 6 months later, Patterson Engineering Solutions had 15 employees and contracts with 12 manufacturing companies across 3 states. Ray Williams's plant was running at 18% higher efficiency than before we started. Better than I'd promised. Kevin Torres was my head of implementation, making twice what he'd made at Patterson Manufacturing. Dennis was forced out as CEO in August. The board brought in outside leadership to try to salvage what was left of the company. Scott transferred to the sales department where his MBA might actually be useful. But the real satisfaction came on a Tuesday morning in October when I got a call from one of my former colleagues still at Patterson. Russell, you're not going to believe this. They're trying to hire us as consultants to fix their production systems. I laughed. Are you serious? Dead serious. Apparently, they can't figure out how to make their own equipment work efficiently. What did you tell them? I told them they should call Patterson Engineering Solutions. We're the experts on this stuff. That afternoon, I was working in my expanded shop when Jennifer came out to tell me dinner was ready. You know what I realized today? I said, putting down my tools. What's that? The best revenge isn't about destroying the people who wronged you. It's about building something so much better that they have to come to you for help. She kissed my cheek. Took you long enough to figure that out. As we walked back to the house, I thought about my dad and what he'd taught me about building things that last. Turns out he was right. If you do good work and treat people fairly, eventually that matters more than politics or connections, or who your father is. Patterson Engineering Solutions was proof of that. And every day we stayed in business was proof that sometimes the old ways still work, if you're willing to fight for them.